Yeah, so with GitHub here, there's a link to AWS Lambda, and inside of here, there's a sample directory here where I have a bunch of pieces of code like consumer SQS, populate SQS, a sentiment analysis system, an SNS system, state machine, Lambdas, all kinds of stuff in here. So what I'm going to start out with, though, is I'm going to click on this Colab notebook here, and then we'll kind of use this to walk through what we're going to cover. So I guess to start out with, one of the things that we've already gone through is that Cloud9 is a really powerful component of developing with AWS Lambda, and also it's just good for lots of different things. But what we haven't really got into is how to use Cloud9 to develop things with Lambda, and that's one of the fun things that we're going to cover today. And just a highlight is that you can build these Lambda functions inside of here, and then you can actually debug them and actually call into their endpoints directly inside of the Lambda interface. So the first thing that we'll do is we're just going to go through, before we get into the Cloud9, is just create a hello world Lambda function. So I'm going to go back to our console here, and I'm going to log into Lambda. So I'm going to log out of Vocarium, and I'm going to go back to the console. Whoops, it would be this. And then I will go for two-factor authentication. And we'll do this. Okay, so first thing up here is that there's two ways to create Lambdas. The first way is just do it in the console. And what's nice about playing around with it initially with the console is that you can actually get a good feel for what it is that Lambda does. So to start with, let's go ahead and create this function here and create a hello world function. Now, I'm going to use this author from scratch, but a couple things to point out are that this blueprint here is pretty neat because it lets you look at examples that AWS provides on how to build Lambda functions. So if you wanted to filter, for example, by runtime and filter by, let's say, Python 3.7, you could look at a bunch of really useful Lambda functions that you may want to do in building like a data engineering pipeline. Like, for example, get an object from S3. That's probably something you'd want to do. Or build a microservice that talks to DynamoDB is another one that's a pretty useful service. Stream processing, CloudWatch alarm to Slack. These will all be great projects to really play around with if you haven't had experience yet with AWS Lambda. So what I'm going to do again is I'm going to skip past that. I'm going to go to author from scratch, and then I'm going to pick the runtime. A couple things to note here is that for data engineering and machine learning, probably your best bet is going to support Python 3, and that's probably what I would recommend building things with. That being said, if you are familiar with some of these other languages like C# or Go or Java, that could be a great way to actually use the cloud services at a company. Let's say you're working at a Java shop and they're skeptical about the cloud, or you're working at a .NET shop. Well, just go in here and show them how to build a Lambda function with C# or Java, and I guarantee you they'll be very excited about it. Okay, so we're going to pick Python 3.8. I'm going to say, hello, and I'll put today's date. We'll say March. We'll say hello, March 14. And one thing to point out here as well is that this is critical when you're playing around with Lambda functions, is that if you are going to talk to other parts of Lambda, if you are going to talk to other parts of AWS, you have to have the correct permissions. By default, it'll create a new role with just basic permissions, and that's fine. But if you want to communicate with, let's say, S3 or DynamoDB or SageMaker or something like that, you need to create a role that has the privileges to do that. So we're just going to create something with as basic permissions, though, for now. Okay. So step one here is that here's the intro interface here. And really, you can do a lot of work by just hanging around in the Lambda interface. And one of the things that you'll probably first want to play around with is just looking at this designer. And the designer shows you what triggers are associated, where the Lambda is, and then where it's potentially going. In this particular situation, we're just going to write a hello world function. There won't be any triggers, but I will click on this to show you that there's a lot of things you can do with Lambda. You can do API gateways, and that would be for like a REST-based API. So you're going to build a data engineering API, for example. You can build IoT devices. There's a lot of really fun IoT devices, like your fridge, right? You could hook your fridge up to this and collect, metrics about what temperature it's at. Alexa, DynamoDB, S3. So SNS and SQS. And today we're actually going to go over how to use SQS later, which is a infinite scale messaging system. But in a nutshell, this is really one of the advantages of Lambda, is that you can do an event-driven architecture. Now, if we scroll down here, a couple things to point out is that you can use this as an IDE to develop your code, and it's actually not bad. This is the default Lambda that they give you. So what I'm going to do here is also point out a couple other things. So the Lambda Handler, this is really where all the magic happens. And there's two things to know about the Lambda Handler. One is that the event itself is where a payload will come in. So if you have a trigger set up to S3 or a trigger set up to SQS or a trigger set up to IoT, it's going to have a different payload for each one of those events. And let me show you how to find out what those payloads would be. The way you would do that is if you go over to this test section here and say configure test event, it actually has by default just like a really simple test event. But if you scroll through here, it shows you every possible event that Amazon can access, and it shows you what the payload would look like. So let's just scroll down here and say, S3. So S3 put would mean that a file is put into S3. And so if I click on this, you can see that I would need to be able to process this JSON payload or something equivalent to this in order to do something with S3. So for example, maybe I want to transcode something to a different codec, or I have a text document and I want to transcribe it from English to Spanish. I would have to process this payload and then call out in my Lambda function the automatic translation service. In this case, though, we're going to keep it really simple, and we're just going to make a really simple function. So I'm going to go here, and I will just put in a print statement that says hello. Say, I'll make it an F string, and I'll just say hello there, event, and then I can put in a curly bracket. And so what will happen is that this will just print out into the console what the event is, and we can just leave that by itself for right now. One thing to also point out, though, is that when you do a print statement, the print statements will actually go to CloudWatch logs, and this is a great way to debug what's happening in a CloudWatch system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Save. And now I'm going to go over to configure test event, and I'm going to look at the hello world one, and we'll just call this hello, and then I'm going to just take out all the stuff and just put something in there, like we'll say UNCC hello, like that. Okay, now let's go ahead and create this. And from here, now that I've got this test event, I can click on test, and look, you can see that the body, hello from Lambda, nothing's changed because it's just returning back a JSON payload, but the log message, look, you see the log message is this print statement where it says hello there. So this is a great way to debug it just in the console. Let me scroll down and show you a couple other things as well. So this is where the environmental variables could be set, or you could manage the environmental variables. So like maybe you would look at different environments and you would have a different database you'd talk to. Under here, this execution role, this is where you would have to put in a new role if you wanted to talk to other resources. And typically what I do is I will actually create like an administrative role that will have the ability to talk to all kinds of services in AWS just while I'm developing something, so that it's easier to build a Lambda function. You also can go through and enable tracing that gives you like more detailed information. And then another one to be aware of is that you potentially need to toggle this depending on what kind of problem you're solving. So by default, you can actually run 1,000 Lambdas in parallel, which is pretty incredible actually. And so you, maybe when you're developing something, maybe you want to tweak it and tell it that you want to bring it down to, let's say, a lower level of concurrency. And in this case, maybe we say, I only want 2 Lambdas to run at a time because that's all I need to do. It doesn't, there's no reason for there to be, a large amount of concurrency. So also another thing I'll point out here is that if you scroll up to monitoring here, it will show you all the different things that have happened. And so this is when you're debugging Lambda, this is probably one of the first things that you want to look at, is you want to go inside of here and say, okay, did I invoke something? Great. And then, how long did it last? Like if there's something wrong, a lot of times a Lambda will take too long. Also, was it successful or not? And then if you look at this, where it says view logs and CloudWatch, this a lot of times is the only way to actually, see what's happening in your Lambda system, because it's in the cloud. And if I click on this, look, you can see the payload, right? So this is the print message. So anytime I put a print message into AWS Lambda, it's going to populate right there. So let's go back here, and I'm going to go back to my configuration here, and I'm going to put one more message, and I'll say print this. We'll just say this is the context. And so the context just has basically contextual information about what's happening in the Lambda function. So it's less commonly used. And then another thing I'm going to do is, why don't I do this? I'll just say new payload, and I will put in something inside of here. And I'll just say, for example, hello payload. Maybe what I'll do is I will take the event itself, and then I believe I could take the events and I could make, let's see, like a return statement is equal to hello from Lambda, and then new payload. And then we could just put in return statement here. So I'm just going to basically take what gets passed in and also return it back out. So that's the other thing that's helpful about a Lambda function is that you can actually not only just do something, but also return something back. And if I got the string formatting correct here, maybe we'll also make this double quotes so that it matches that it should be correct here. So let me go ahead and save this, and let's click on test. So I got an error on line. Yeah, I have an extra quote there, so we'll save that. We'll say test. There we go. So now you can see, look, the payload that I sent in there, this test object, you can see that it passes through the system, and then I inject it into the return statement. So this is how an API would work, or how you could grab something and return it to another function. So this is, again, really shows the power of a Lambda. Not only can you process something, but you can return it back out. So that means you can chain these things together. So if I go again to my monitoring section here, and I click on View Logs and CloudWatch, what'll happen is that we should have a second message here. So I can look at the latest log statement, which is right here, and then look, see, this is the context. Look, it says, here's the context. It just shows you it's just something that gets passed in that you could process if you wanted to. But look, see, nothing changes with the print statement because I don't log that print statement. So if we go back here and I look at this function, even though I return it, it's not going to show up in the logs because I didn't print it. So the print statements are the things that show up in the log, right? So we saw two different things. So the only way I can get this to show up in the log messages is I would have to add a print statement here that just takes the return statement and actually prints that out. And I could even put a message here that says, like, logging what I will return, like this, and then put that inside of here, save it, and then test it. What did I do? Line, oh, I didn't, sure. There we go. Save it and test. Yeah, and so if I go back again to monitoring, then I go to this. Let's see, let's go back here. Oh, it's showing the old log. Let's go back here. Let's refresh this. I think I ran it. Let's just double check I can debug this last message. Here we go. Right, now I can see that it says something. So this is a good kind of stopping point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to